good afternoon. This is Lindsay DeRosa and Linda Sina here from the Securities Regulation area of the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. Linda, can you talk a little bit about what we're doing here today?
Sure. Before, if you don't mind, I'd like to introduce myself just a little bit. As Lindsay said, my name is Linda Sina. I have been in the industry, in the securities industry now for well over, goodness, probably 40 years. I was in actual industry. I was a stockbroker and worked in the security side that way for 25 years, and I've now been a regulator for the last 13 years. So I have a lot of industry experience on both the selling side and the other side and on the regulator side.
Right. And I've been in securities regulation for 13 years. Come out of law school and started working with the division and have been doing that since.
Great. Well, then let me talk a little bit about why we're here. Investment scams are still very active in Michigan, and yet most people still think it can't happen to them. And that's just not true. I think it happens every day to people of different genders, different ages, different education levels. And I think most people would be surprised to know that statistics show that 50-year-old men with a college degree are one of the highest segments of the population to be scammed.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know a lot of times in the complaints area where I work, I frequently will tell consumers, they'll say, I have a college degree or I'm a professional, I can't believe this happened to me. And I tell them, we very frequently get complaints from doctors, lawyers, engineers, people who outsource their investment decisions. So I can believe that information.
I think personally one of the reasons that the 50-year-old men, it happens to a lot, is that in this day and age, companies don't have pension plans anymore. They don't have defined benefit plans anymore. They've got 401ks.
Right.
And so the days of individuals retiring and getting a monthly check every month for the rest of their life, they're gone.
Right.
What they get instead is this big lump sum of money when they're getting ready to retire. And as they're retiring and get the money or getting close to it, they start panicking. They realize they don't have enough money. And so they start looking at riskier investments that have higher rates of return to try to make all of that back up. And that doesn't usually end well.
Right. And unfortunately, we have seen where maybe fraudulent offerings will be targeted towards people who have a lump sum of money available to invest. And unfortunately, that's one of the things we see. So I think it's really important to equip people with the right information on how to do research ahead of time and make sure the person that they're working with is legitimate.
Yeah, I think that's what we're here to do today. As you said, what we want to do today is we want to teach the people how to be wise investors. We use that acronym a lot in the securities industry. WISE stands for, the W means wait. Don't make a quick decision. If someone comes up to you and says you have to invest now, it's got to be done right now, it's a now or never time, say no.
Right.
Do your research.
You should have the time that you need to do the research, and we'll talk about some of the research tools that you have available to you.
And another, the I in the WISE is for investigate. Call our office, research with us, research online. Don't give your money to anyone unless you've done a good research on them. We always say that people spend more time researching what's the next cell phone they're going to buy than they do deciding what person or what product to invest their life savings in.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about it a little bit more, but I know the press release that the department issued today includes links to some of the websites you can use to do research, and I think they will also be included here in the comment section.
Right. And then the S stands for seek information. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. Ask the tough questions. If they can't explain the investment to you in a way that you understand it, don't invest.
Right, absolutely. You should fully understand what you're investing in and have all of the time and resources you need to make those decisions.
And the other thing that they should give you, and I know you'll touch on this later too, is they should be giving you a prospectus or an offering circular. They should be giving you material that you can read to research the investment. And if they don't give that to you, ask them for one. If they don't give you one, don't invest until you get one.
Right. Absolutely.
And then the E and Y stands for educate yourself. Take responsibility for your investment decisions. Do your work.
And there are a lot of resources with investor education materials, some of the things we'll talk about today. There's a lot of places that you can go to learn about investment scams that are occurring and different resources to check registrations and things like that.
Right. And always remember that we are your securities regulators. Right. And we are here to help you through that process.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay. So that's what we're doing today.
Awesome. So you mentioned that you've been in the securities industry and regulation for a long time. Can you, just to back up a little bit, talk a little bit about how securities regulation works?
Absolutely. The offer and sale of securities, and along with those who advise on and sell the securities, and let's stop and make that more plain English.
Yeah.
The product that you're going to buy and the people advising you to buy that product or selling you that product are registered or regulated in Michigan pursuant to the Michigan Uniform Securities Act. And the majority of those people will need to be registered also with the state of Michigan, along with the products that they sell. And federally, the Securities and Exchange Commission also has jurisdiction over securities.
Right.
So basically, the person that's selling you the product or advising you on the product needs to be registered, and the product that they're selling you or advising you on needs to either be registered and have an exemption.
Right.
And if it doesn't have an exemption, don't invest.
Right. And the person that's talking to you about this investment or soliciting that investment should be able to explain to you the registration of both themselves as well as the product and provide you with that information.
Absolutely. Okay, so tell me a little bit, if you could, about the Bureau receives complaints and what kind of complaints, what do they look like?
You know, we get a wide variety of complaints. It can be everything from I invested with my neighbor and they're no longer picking up the phone, I don't know where my money is, to I'm not really happy with the services or fees that were charged. Or sometimes people in the industry who work in the industry will say, hey, there's a guy down the street that's competing with me and he's not registered. What's going on there? And so we get a wide spectrum of complaints. And those can come from, like I said, the industry, from consumers directly. And you mentioned the Securities and Exchange Commission. We work closely with the other regulators, other states, other people who work in the financial industry and the federal regulators. And so we can share complaints or complaint information with those agencies as well.
What are some of the red flags that you see?
Well, I think you touched on a lot of them at the beginning. A pressure to decide quickly is definitely a red flag. If someone is pressuring you not to do those checks, you have to ask yourself, why don't they want me to research this investment? Promises of high returns with little or no risk, that's not how investments work. Typically, you're going to get the higher rate of return when it's a riskier investment. So if someone's trying to sell you something, claiming it's a very high rate of return and there's little or no risk, that's a large red flag for us. The person or product is not registered. Like you mentioned, there are some exemptions that might apply. I would certainly talk to the person about those exemptions. You can call our office to get verification of registration. But if they're not registered, it's just one more layer of research that you may want to do to get some assurances of your comfort level with the investment. Missing documentation.
Yeah.
Under the securities laws, you have to be provided with material information about the investment. So that includes, how is the investment going to make money? What are some of the risks? Is my money going to be locked up for a certain period of time? Who's getting commissions on selling this product? So that information should be available to you. If they don't give you that information, that's a red flag. I would certainly ask for it. If they refuse to give it to you, definitely a red flag. Once you do make the investment, something to look out for is account discrepancies. Are you not getting your monthly statements? Are they coming in with errors where you're seeing that the investment amounts don't match up or the account numbers aren't lining up? Things that maybe look a little bit off to you. Certainly, you can make a call to our office. And as we'll talk about, you can file a complaint.
Are there specific types of investments that the Bureau sees more often that you have a problem with?
You know, I've been doing this, like I said, about 15 years. And a couple of recurring investments that we see over and over again are some of the ones that are mentioned in the release that was put out today. Promissory notes, and these are marketed as guaranteed investments, where someone will essentially borrow money from you and promise to pay money. Those are assumed to be securities. And so along with that information, they should be giving you material information, and you can't just count on that guarantee of payback, because at the end of the day, the guarantee is very often only as good as the paper it's written on.
We get that all the time. They said it was guaranteed.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, once that person claims they don't have the money or they're not getting the money back, that guarantee isn't as helpful as you thought it was going to be. Real estate investments frequently pop up. Real estate's often sold as a secure investment and marketed as, because it's related to real estate, there's value there. Well, not necessarily, because a lot of times maybe it's not actually secured by the real estate, or real estate is not a very liquid investment, which means that you can't get your money out very frequently. And we see it a lot of times when the market goes down, we'll see an uptick in investments related to real estate, whether it's house flipping or other ventures related to real estate. We frequently see complaints in that area. And affinity fraud is another area, unfortunately, that we see a lot of complaints. Affinity fraud refers to investment scams that target certain groups or individuals, maybe ethnic community or a religious group, and perpetrators will use their association with that group to gain trust. and discourage people from doing their homework or checking on the investment. And they'll say, I'm a member of your church, you should trust me. Well, don't you see all of your peers making this investment? You should believe it too. So unfortunately, we do see a lot of complaints in that arena where once it gets into the community, it spreads very quickly, and that homework that isn't often done. And so speaking of doing your homework, can you talk a little bit about how a person can check, or how someone can check if a person or product is registered?
Absolutely. There's a couple of ways you can do it. Let's start with people. You can call us. The number is on the Facebook Live page. It's in the release. Call us. We can actually pull up the individual that you're thinking about investing with. We can let you know if they're licensed. We can let you know what their prior work experience is. And probably more important to most people is that we can let them know if there's any disciplinary measures or any disclosure. For example, we'll know if there's been customer complaints filed against the individual. We'll know if there's been any regulatory actions filed against the individual. And probably something a lot of people don't know is we'll know if there's any financial issues. If they have any outstanding liens or any outstanding compromise with creditors, you'll be aware of those.
Right.
And I think that whole package is something someone would want to know if they're trying to decide who to invest their money with.
Absolutely.
And you can also do that online. Both broker check and investment advisor public disclosure are links that are also here on the page, or on the Facebook Live page, that you can go through. And it will let you look it up yourself online. You can just put in the person's name and it'll bring it up, and it'll give you the same information that we just disclosed. You can print it off and you can take your time and review it and make a good, solid decision. And the nice thing about this is that the person never needs to know that you did this research on them. They won't know that you wanted to verify their information. Now, on the other hand, though, if you do want them to know,
Right.
go right ahead and ask their CRD number or their IARD number, because everyone has a registration number if they're in the securities industry. And if they are a really good advisor or broker, they should be happy to give you that number. That's and right. Happy that you're doing the research on them. And you can look that up also along with them, and that would be helpful too.
Right. And I would think that I would urge investors to ask for the CRD number, because they shouldn't feel any sort of qualm or hesitation to let the person know that they're doing their research. Right. I think most investors or investment advisors will be happy to know that they're an informed investor and that they're seeking their information. And I think that's a great tool. They shouldn't feel any sort of having to hide it, and they can ask for that CRD number, and that's part of the industry. And people who work in the industry understand it's all about disclosure, and they should be happy to disclose all of that information.
Absolutely. And for product, it works basically the same way. You can call us. We will look at the product. There's a couple of different systems that we have. We have our own internal system where products listed on, and then there's also another system called Edgar. And we can look and see if the product is registered or if it's been filed, and we can let you know that. We can actually walk you through how to get onto Edgar and do it yourself the first time, just like we can do that with Broker Check and IEPD. We can help you go through and let you know how to do it. So for the future, if you want to do it yourself, you can. Right. But we're always there to do it with you. And we'll let them know if it's registered or if it's filed.
Right.
So it kind of brings me to a question. If people start looking and people start having problems, how do they file complaints if they have concerns?
Sure. Well, like you said, the phone number is always a great resource. They can call and they can be routed to me or one of the other investigators. We can walk them through that. We do have a complaint form on the website that they can fill out. It gives an address on the complaint form they can mail it into. It's just a one page where they identify who they are and who their complaint is against. We do ask that they provide a sheet of paper, just writing out, what their concerns are and providing any supporting documentation they may have.
Does the Bureau act as an attorney?
No, we don't act as an attorney for the consumers. So when you're filing a complaint with us, that's not the same thing as going to an attorney and filing a civil suit against the rep. That is something that consumers do have the ability to do under the Securities Act, is file a civil action or go to arbitration if their primary concern is return of their funds. Our agency acts on behalf of the entire state of Michigan. So we certainly would encourage consumers to file complaints, because if someone is violating the law, we would like to know about it, and then we can issue orders ordering them to stop that. Or if they have a license and it needs to be revoked, we can take the appropriate action for the benefit of the state.
Okay. So can complaints be filed anonymously?
They can. So if you have concerns about having your name associated with a complaint, we do accept anonymous complaints. You would just leave the name portion blank. It's obviously helpful for the investigation standpoint. If we have a consumer, we can call, get more information, get documentation, things like that. But we certainly will take anonymous complaints as
So
well.
if someone's really concerned about that, they can still do that.
Absolutely.
Well, that's good to know. How many investigations do you do on average?
Last year we did close to 350. We had 346 investigations were open last year. Yeah, and so those can come from consumers, like I said, regulators, or sometimes internally generated from our examination program or application amendments, things like that.
And how many of those turn into enforcement orders?
Last year we issued 84 administrative actions. So
That's a lot.
a lot.
So how can the public review those orders? Where do they go for that?
Right. Well, like you had mentioned on Broker Check, if someone has been subject to a disciplinary action, that information will be available on Broker Check. And then we also post the orders on our website. And so if you go to michigan.gov/securities under disciplinary action reports, they're listed in alphabetical order. So they could certainly go there and look for the rep they're working with to see if they see their name, or they could go to Broker Check because Broker Check would incorporate not only our agency, but other state regulators or federal agencies.
So that kind of brings me back to when we were talking about doing the due diligence. If someone's doing a due diligence and they look on the Broker Check or the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure and we look there, we should probably also add this DAR as a place to look.
Sure.
Because
absolutely.
if someone's not registered but's out there acting as a registered person, we might see an order there.
Absolutely, right. And they might not show up on Broker Check because they don't have that license, but we do often take actions against unlicensed people. And so, yeah, that information would be available on our DAR, or disciplinary action
That makes
reports.
sense.
So I know that you've had a lot of experience with seeing different investigations over the years. Can you think of some examples that stick out
We've
to
had
you?
so many.
Mhm.
We've had so many. So to pick a couple that I think might be relevant to try to bring home what we're trying to point out today, one that jumps into my mind was a woman. She was registered, had been registered for years. She actually had the approval of a very large school system to be the advisor for the school system for the teachers. So she was in the schools every day, sitting down with the teachers, managing their retirement portfolios that they gave her. She had a very large client base. She was a mentor. She was active. She did everything. She was just this perfect person.
Right.
And one day, she called her clients and said, I would like to suggest that we move some of your money into another investment that could probably give you a little bit higher rate of return. She'd done this so many times.
Right.
Always been okay, always been into regular investments. And the clients did what they had done every other time. They said yes.
Without asking questions.
Without asking to see offering circular, the paperwork, any questions. She did have a name for the product. So she'd given them the name. And that time, though, when she moved the money, she moved it into her checking account. She stole millions.
Right.
Teachers, these poor people were not able to retire. They had to continue working. Most of them lost their life savings.
And I think that goes back to the point of not only do you do your diligence when you first start investing, but you
Yes.
maintain that diligence throughout the relationship. And again, not only are the people registered, because if you would call to check on the individual,
She
there
was
would be
registered.
registration, but the products as
And
well.
that
Another
was-
area to
yeah.
look at.
That's the point of that one, is to point out your due diligence never ends.
Right.
Even though the majority of advisors and brokers are excellent people,
Right.
really looking out for the best interest of their clients, there is occasionally someone that's not, and you are always your own best advocate, and you need to keep on track of things.
Right. Absolutely. And if they are legitimate, there should be nothing to hide, and they should not
Absolutely.
have any qualms about you doing that due diligence.
Absolutely. And then another one that jumps to mind, that kind of goes along with your affinity, is that it was one of the large mega churches
Okay.
in a large part of Michigan. And there was a very well-known family that had gone there for years. Everyone knew the family. This was a sad story. So in the middle of a church service, the pastor stood up and announced that this well-known family, their grandson was selling a bond, and he had a wonderful investment opportunity that the church was going to participate, and he wanted to make sure that the members of the congregation also had the chance to participate in this investment. And so he was going to be in the back of the sanctuary after the service to take questions and to take orders. And so after the service, this group of people got up, stood, and walked around to the back. They all invested with this gentleman, and they all lost their money.
Yeah,
It was a scam.
It does speak to the affinity fraud because you're there's pressure because your peers are doing it, there's pressure from a religious leader. and then immediately going to make the investment decision without giving the time to do that investigation.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Now the pastor lost his money, the church lost the money, and so did the parishioners. So, and now the interesting thing too about those two, and we could go on and on with stories, lots of sad stories. They went to prison. So that kind of leads me to my next question: is do we criminally prosecute?
Right. So our bureau is in charge of the licensing. We are not a criminal agency. However, we do work with criminal agencies. But I would certainly advise consumers, if they have complaints, to file it with all sorts of agencies. Not only do they file with the licensing agency, us, if there's other states they're operating in, that state securities administrator, federally the SEC, local police departments, FBI, Attorney General's office can do criminal prosecution. So the Securities Act does include criminal liability. We just are not the enforcing agency on the criminal aspect.
So what are some of the questions a consumer might ask their advisor or their broker? What are some good questions?
Well, as I think we've hit on a lot, is asking about the registration. Are you registered? What's your CRD number? If you aren't registered, why not? What's the exemption you're relying on? Have you been subject to any discipline by a regulatory agency? I know sometimes you may be a little bit nervous to put them on the spot like that, but they are very familiar with how their disclosure looks, so I'm sure they'd rather have a face-to-face conversation with you about it than have you find it and think that they're trying to hide it. I would ask what kind of training and experience they have, because if they're recommending a complex product, I would want to know, do they have experience in this product? Are they familiar with how it works? Do they fully understand the risk factors? If they advertise a designation, that's another area too. Designations, there's a lot of designations out there. As far as what we just register a securities agent. We don't register the specific designations. FINRA has a great tool.
Yes.
That's a designation tool that you can go in and look at that particular designation, and it gives you the information of, what kind of work has to be done to gain that designation. Is there testing? Is there years of experience? It can link you to that actual organization so you can verify that designation. So that's another good area to do your homework on.
That is probably one of the biggest deficiencies we know when we're out on examinations, is we call it the alphabet soup.
Right.
They put all of those initials after their name to try to give themselves more credibility, and it's really misleading.
Yeah. I mean, some of the designations, don't get me wrong, are very
absolutely
substantive and add a lot of value. We've seen, of course, on the flip side where it doesn't, unfortunately, add much value. And as long as the consumer is fully equipped with the information, what that means, it's very helpful.
And what it took to get it, yeah.
Another question to ask would be, how do they get paid?
Yeah, that's a good one.
What is that relationship here? Are you charging me a fixed fee? Do you get paid based on how much money is in my account? Is it based on what product you sell me? Do you get more money for selling me this product versus that product? That's definitely something that you can ask.
I think that's interesting too, because sometimes they can charge you different fees too. They can put a hat on over here and sell you security and make that fee, then put the hat on over here and advise your fund and make that, and then they could sell you the insurance over here if they're an insurance agent and sell you that. So it's important to know how all the different fees work, and don't be afraid to ask.
Right, and it is confusing. So I don't think there should be any embarrassment in not understanding that. It's widely known that can be a struggle to understand the different type of fee structures, but who you're working with should be able to explain that to you.
Yes.
When they're soliciting an investment, you can ask, how does this investment work? How do they make the money that they can pay me this guaranteed rate? Can they explain to you how the business operates to make this promised return? Of course, is the product registered with the SEC or the state securities agency? What are some of the risks of the investment? They should definitely talk about the risks of the investment along with touting the advantages of the investment, because as we talked about before, the higher the rate of return, higher the risks that usually go along with that.
Right.
And then another risk would be the liquidity risk of not being able to take your money out. Some investments do have periods of time where you can't withdraw your money. And if you want to know that ahead of time, if it's important to you to have access to your funds, that's another good question to ask is there any restrictions on my ability to withdraw?
Right, and there are some good investments that for good investment purposes, you do have a time period where you can't get to your funds, but they need to understand how that works.
Absolutely. It's not necessarily meaning there's a problem with the investment, it just may not be right for you.
Exactly.
So can you tell us a little bit more about some other resources that the consumers have available to them?
There are a lot of resources that we're going to have for you on this Facebook Live page. Some of them are there already, but There are a few others that aren't listed that I want to bring to your attention. One would be the Securities and Exchange Commission has a page called investor.gov. It is a full page of information for investors. They have a page dedicated to investor alerts and bulletins. In the last month, for example, they have one on marijuana fraud. They have one on how to check the background of someone, what we've been talking about here. And they also have one on self-directed IRAs and the fraud that can be involved there.
Because the frauds do evolve.
Oh, they do.
Especially as the headlines come and change, whether it's Bitcoin or marijuana industry, as the trends in the news change, so do the trends in investments. So I think it's important to keep ahead of those alerts and to see what to look out for.
Yeah, the scam artists watch that and they look. And then when someone sees that and someone comes to them, they think, I'm on the front end of this.
Right.
I need to invest in this right now. I've got a really sharp guy who knows what's going on.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Another really good one is FINRA.org, and they have an investor education page that's filled with podcasts and all sorts of other information that help them stay informed. Mm-hmm. Then another one that's really good that most people aren't aware of is NASA.org, and that's NASA with 2 A's, so it's NASAA. And NASA is the state security regulators all combined into one group. So this would be a lot of contributions from different states in there, and they have some great things. They have the NASA Fraud Center, there's investor alerts, there's tips, there's retirement plannings, there's many other resources. They even have an investment fraud awareness quiz that I really think every investor should take before they do their next investment.
Yeah, and I think depending on too what investment is being offered to you, whether it's an exchange traded fund or a mutual fund, a lot of those resources will have specific information about that investment type.
Yeah, good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything else that you can think of?
Well, I definitely want to point people once again to the complaint form on our website, michigan.gov/securities. You can file a complaint. If you're using that complaint form, if you file a complaint, it will be assigned to an investigator. We may reach out to you, gather some additional information. But if you have concerns, I definitely encourage you to check that out.
Great. And I think we'd like to leave everyone that with an uninformed investor is the best defense against fraud. Right. An investor who asks the right questions, who calls the state regulators and does a background check on both the person they're investing with and the product they're investing in is less likely to be a victim of fraud.
Absolutely. We'd love to see the homework done ahead of time to avoid if we can. Yep.
Okay. Thank you for joining us today.